Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Traversing Entrepreneurship podcast, a show for business owners who set out to do something different and did not stop there. This is Derek Dall'Olmo coming to you from Traverse City, Michigan, the city that inspired the name of this show. With over 18 years of experience in the finance industry, I've heard my fair share of success as well as horror stories in business. On this podcast, I enjoy sitting down with a variety of entrepreneurs to talk about what it takes to build a successful business, including all the ups and downs that come along with doing something different and paving your own way in life. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Brian Smith, a 15-year veteran entrepreneur and sought-after coach and consultant to over 500 entrepreneurs and founders via his company Strategy Ladders. Join us today as we discuss his journey into the entrepreneurial trenches, building a successful agency, a handful of failures, and his desire to help others in the trenches too. Welcome, Brian, to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Excited to be here, Derek.
So, Brian, can you give us and our listeners a little bit of your backstory, kind of maybe what life was like before you started Strategy Ladders and how you got there?
Yeah, I've lived a lot of lives in the last 40 years, so I'll try to keep it brief. But I grew up in Florida. We talked about that actually before we started recording, and at a young age, was interested in business. First business was actually washing boats at the local marina, which I later found out I was grossly underpricing myself at $20 a boat. So,
Oh man,
yeah.
$20
But
per boat, not $20 a foot.
yeah. But then as I got into high school, I actually, I was a pretty competitive athlete, didn't quite have the time. So I started working actually at Dairy Queen. I was flipping burgers in the back of Dairy Queen. They wouldn't let me talk to customers directly. And so I originally went to school to a liberal arts school thought I was going to study video and anthropology and be an ethnographer. And then I looked at the average income of those folks and realized I wanted to make more than 72 grand at the peak of my career. And I switched to a business program at the University of Denver. And so I should also add, even while I was in the liberal arts program, this was before Facebook and everything really had taken off. In fact, I was there the year Facebook got to the school. And I started a business there, going to parties and hiring kids to take photos. And then this is back when you used to go online and you could pick the photos and they'd print them and send them to you. And
Sure.
so started up a business doing that. Um, I got to University of Denver and I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to study in business. I knew real estate was a place to make money, so I started out in real estate. But I also found out that I wasn't actually bad at math like I thought, because once they started putting dollar signs in front of the numbers, it all started to make sense to me. And so I ended up
All you got to
getting,
do is carry the one.
yeah, yeah, it was huge for me. In fact, this actually is, I think, a little bit of an anecdote that kind of explains how I've advanced through business. But in my very first finance class, of course, I wasn't paying attention at the beginning. I probably was out partying the night before, and they told us what calculator to buy, and they wanted us to go get the HP and sort of standard business calc, and exactly. And I went out and I bought the TI Instruments BA2. And so while everybody else was just memorizing which keys to press to get the outcome, I had to learn what each one meant so I could understand how to use this calculator I just bought that they wouldn't let me return because I had opened it. And so that
Lessons learned.
actually, yeah, it taught me, learning the fundamentals was huge. And so by the time I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I was actually tutoring grad students in finance. And yeah, I was the kid that they'd say, okay, who can show me how to do this in Excel? I'd say, I can show you how to do this with pen and paper. And so I really started to learn finance and got a master's of science in finance as well while I started out in investment banking. So I started out as an analyst at a boutique investment bank that focused on construction and engineering. Actually, our largest client there was Goldman Sachs. They would come to us to assist with all their construction and
Okay.
engineering related work. And then I got hired when I graduated with my master's degree by the largest private real estate investment bank in the US. And so I got into real estate. I became the youngest associate in the company's history. But one of the reasons that happened was here I was working in Denver, which for real estate was a really hot market. It was a great place to be. But there was this huge disconnect. Our managing director, for instance, I was like, how can you be managing director and not have more ambition, right? He was fat and happy, and
Yep.
um, I'd go into the office during the day, and I remember specifically one of the highest producing um, vice presidents in our office. One day I saw him. I won't say his name, but I said, "Hey, how you doing today?" And he said, "Well, I didn't get hit by a bus." And I said, "Well, that's a good thing." He says, "No, now I have to be in this damn place." And
So there's the
so
dichotomy between the fat and happy and, the aspiring producer.
exactly, exactly. So I knew I wanted to get out, and I met some people that were, you know, let's just say they're sort of salt of the earth, like really knew the um, the ins and the outs of a very particular market in Denver, which was it's known as the River North area. A lot of people know it as Rhino,
Okay.
just north of downtown Denver. And I went into business with two of these guys who had some ins on some real estate deals. And what we were doing was I didn't have anywhere near the money to buy these properties. So we were going into properties that were sitting vacant. Our first deal had been sitting vacant for almost 20 years, where the owner had sold the business but retained the real estate. Nobody wanted to buy it. And so we did a master lease with a purchase option. Our master lease was for year one was 61 cents per square foot per year. And yeah, on just shy of
That's
30,000 feet.
unreal.
Yeah. And with that, we even got about $150,000 in not just tenant improvement credit. He gave us cash to improve his business, to improve the building.
Okay.
So within about a year and a half, we were netting by breaking that up and turning it into artist studios and creative office space. Literally, like with 30, 40-foot ceilings, we just were putting up 2 sheets of gypsum board, making 8-foot walls with open ceilings, and we were netting about $14 per square foot. And
Wow.
yeah, at that point, our I think our lease had increased to 67 cents per square foot that we were paying. And so
10%
we
increase.
yeah, we had then uh, we replicated that model multiple times in that area. In fact, I was in my late 20s and I was elected the chairman of the registered neighborhood organization there, which is the step below city council.
Okay.
And that was sort of my first foray into city politics. And so we ended up, taking that business. We spun up a commercial real estate brokerage. We bought a coffee shop and turned that into a chain of coffee shops. A lot of stuff, all related to, like, the coffee shop was also had co-working space in it. All of it related to co-working, creative office space, and so forth. And we did quite well. And I ran that business for almost 6 years. But what I found was, especially in a city like Denver, which is, let's just say you hear a lot of rumors about Chicago in terms of what city politics are like. Denver is a little bit smaller, but no different. And so I was disrupting things and got on the wrong side of a few people and found that I was fighting politics more than just going out and being able to run my business. I got really burned out. At our peak, we had over 120 employees and full-time contractors working for us.
Wow.
And so I decided to sell everything. And so that was selling the businesses, selling the real estate. And I used to joke that that job took me 2 years to quit, because it took me about 2 years to unwind and get out of everything. And frankly, if I would have held on longer, I probably could have made a lot more money. But I was burned out, ready to move on, and moved to LA.
You would have been hoping to
And
be hit by a bus.
yeah, there was days, man, I was out, and that was an interesting time in life. I think there's certainly some listeners that can relate to this, that that was a time in my life where, in every room I was in, I was always the youngest guy in the room, right? And
Hmm.
there's a certain amount of like power and influence that can come from being the youngest guy in the room. I'm in a room full of developers all wearing their suit and ties, and I'm showing up in my t-shirt, jean jacket, and pulling my single speed bike in that I rode there. But I wasn't taking care of myself. I was literally sleeping 2 hours a night. I was Sundays, I'd sleep basically all day. My typical eating was typically around like 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I would have my first meal, which would be ordering two Jimmy Johns and typically like three or four Diet Cokes, and because they'd deliver it. And then I would sit at a bar at 10:30 at night and drink, and eat something greasy and go back to the office. It got bad enough that I was drinking a lot at the time. My bookkeeper decided to keep a line item just for the alcohol that was consumed in the boss's office, because people would come in, we'd open a bottle of a black label that turned into
Yep.
two or three, and that was a pretty normal day. Um, but I moved to LA, and initially the plan was to take about 6 months off before I started building something new. And I want to highlight this because anybody who's been through like a big transition in their life, um, a lot of times you can transition what you're doing, but you as a person doesn't change.
Yep.
And so there I was in LA, living right by the beach. I initially started out like I would wake up, and I'm still waking up at 4:30 in the morning. I've got my to-do list of stuff that just didn't matter at all, right? Like here's my to-do list of everything that I'm going to do. I brought all of that stress in. It was just same level. And I realized like I wasn't actually making any of the personal changes that I wanted to make. And so I decided to one day I decided to go to Costa Rica for 2 weeks and just say, look, I'm not bringing a laptop. I'm just going to relax. I'm going to surf.
Sit in a hammock,
Just
surf,
yeah,
have some
and
Mai Tais or whatever they drink.
exactly. And I was, my flight was, it was like mid morning, and I'm rushing around because I have my big to do list and I'm trying to get everything done. And I'll never forget my dog, who was a very mellow dog, came and like sat down in front of me in the door and started like growling at me and barked at me. Like it was almost this like message from my dog of like,
Yeah.
Dad, you got to chill out. What is going on? You are just freaking out for no reason. And so I went to Costa Rica and came back, and that's when I really got into initially angel investing. And I pursued that for about a year while I brought on a few clients coaching, and doing like strategic coaching for them and their startups. And I found very quickly I hated the investing side and I loved the coaching and advising side. And the easiest way to summarize that is because investing, typically what was best for me as the investor was the worst outcome for the founder. And I preferred to work with the founder because those were the folks I could relate to. We were one of the largest small business landlords when I was in the state of Colorado when I was there. So I was very used to working with founders and
Sure.
could personally relate. And so I went all in on that. And that was just about a decade ago now, and went all in on the coaching and consulting, and worked with a lot of fantastic founders, and helped a number of them through exits, through various raises, through um, you know co-founder separations, in some
Corporate
cases,
divorces.
yeah, corporate divorces, and I've been through a few of those on my own. And I found, I was looking at how could I scale that up. And one thing that I found, and I think that this is consistent with all founders, is as soon as you reach a certain level of success, you don't have a lot of peers. There's not many people that you can sit down and talk
Correct.
about the issues you have. That was really poignant with me, where I was sitting with, there was four of us at a table. This is when I lived in Denver, and I was getting sued at the time. And I was being sued for several $1 million. And the one other founder could relate and was like, really could understand the stress I was going through. The other two guys that were employees, that guys that I went to grad school with, thought, man, that's really cool that you're doing stuff so big that you've got millions of dollars. I'm like, no, I don't have this cash. This is they're
This is
suing
a
me over
big thing.
assets. They're suing
Yeah.
me over, yeah. Um, and so I started up an organization called the Founders Organization in early 2016. And one of the reasons I started that was when I looked at groups like YPO and EO, which are two of the most well-known groups. YPO is only about 30% what they consider entrepreneurs. The rest
Okay.
are people who are legacy executives, people who have, inherited their business, which
Took
is,
over mom or dad's business and
yeah, which is actually the reason that YPO was started in the first place. It was folks
okay.
that inherited their business that started it. And then about 40% people who are just working for large companies, GE, Goldman Sachs, and those, those companies even restructured some of their departments to allow more of their people into that organization. And EO, when I was in Denver, for instance, the vast majority of the people in EO, or the largest subgroup, was people who were just real estate investors. And if you're doing a real estate investor doing $1 million a year, that's very different than somebody who's actually gone out and started something from scratch.
Sure.
And so it's a very different risk profile. So when we started the Founders Organization, it was built around having uh, only founders who have built a business that's done at least $2 million in revenue. And we created this really amazing space where we could come together, and we were really built around small dinners to start. And then we started having bigger events and so forth. But these dinners were having, anywhere from 10 to 20 founders sit around, and we asked 3 questions, and you had 60 seconds to answer. And this was the only facilitation we would give. What's your name, the name of your company, and the biggest challenge you're facing right now? And you'd start with that facilitation, and you'd go around the table, and by the end, like, that'd be at 7 o'clock. It'd be 2 a.m, and we're having to kick people out of the restaurant, right?
Yeah.
And so that really took off. We ended up with about 1,500 members. And in 2019, it was never my intention to run that full time, because I was still working on other businesses. I was still coaching and consulting. So we sort of decentralized that, which unfortunately, we went from 35 cities that we were active in to post COVID, there's about 8 now. So it didn't really, we didn't anticipate COVID, and the way that we were structured at the time, it wasn't designed to really be something that we could be as reactive to. But yeah, so that brings me up basically to COVID. So I can get into how I started this current business now if you'd like, but if you have any questions before I keep going, because I'm
Yeah.
going
So
down
I
that
mean, I guess, YPO stands for what? Young Professionals Organization?
Young Presidents Organization.
Young
Yeah.
Presidents Organization. And EO is Entrepreneurial Organization?
Entrepreneurs Organization. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So those
Interesting.
are both, you know, they're, they're both great organizations, but to me, I think, there's certain types of people that those are really good for, and then there's other people that they're not. And it's, you know, I have friends in both of those organizations, right? Like very close friends. And um, I think that anybody that is a founder that is listening right now, they can relate to the fact that, like, there's something incredible about having that private space with like-minded people who've been through similar experiences where you can have these
Absolutely.
conversations. Yeah.
I mean, that's why, most people in the entrepreneurial space seek out coaches, or
Yeah.
consultants, because it's like, hey, I'm doing something, at least in my mind, unique, and it may have been done before. I'm, changing how it's done, but there's nobody else that I can talk to about it. It's like, you look at my circle of personal friends and business friends, just personally. It's like, okay, I've got a big circle of personal friends. My circle of business friends is like 5 people. You
Yeah.
know, we all, own and operate multiple businesses. And it's like, okay, these are the people that you can talk to and talk about, hey, I'm dealing with this. Have you ever dealt with that before? Yes. How did you get through it? Boom, boom. It's that type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Knowledge, or somebody who's been through it,
Yeah.
where maybe not exactly the same, or maybe not even the same business, but the idea that they've been through something that is similar, and you've been through, I mean, you've gone through multiple iterations of, I'm going to say the same thing, but in different industries, and they all have different outcomes. So it's like, okay, how do you said you didn't anticipate COVID, but how do you anticipate kind of those, different things that you're going to go through that you may or may not be able to anticipate the outcome?
Yeah. Well, and we can talk about it, strictly from sort of that experiential side of like, a lot of us want to talk about things strictly business, but the reality is that most of us as entrepreneurs don't really talk about it until we're in those private circles. Is it is a truly emotional journey that you're going on.
Very much
And
so.
yeah, and to have people that can actually relate to that and understand, like, this is one of the reasons why, I have coached some people who are high performing like executives in the past, but the difference between somebody who's an employee versus a entrepreneur or founder, just in mindset and even how you handle problems, is so different that I find that I have to shift my thinking so much to work with those types of people that I'm just not nearly as effective as working with somebody that has that founder mindset. We think about problems, we think about challenges, and we handle them so differently than the average person.
Yes. Because everything has a solution, as opposed to focusing on the problem, we focus on what are the potential solutions.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, let's try, boom, here's potential solution A. Positives, negatives. B, positives, boom, boom, boom. All right, this one seems to be the most, it's a very, I mean, at least in my mind, it's always very regimented. Nothing's ever on fire, but it's like, okay, this has to be dealt with first. Here's the priority. And then, okay, how can I deal with this? A, B,
Yeah.
C. It could be all the way through Z. But it's like, okay, boom, boom, boom. Let's identify one that we think is, the most highest probability of succeeding, and then
Yeah.
try that. A lot of the times it works. Some of the times it takes 3 or 4 iterations of that, and you fall flat on your face more times than you care to admit. I mean, everybody has this. What do I want to say? Everybody has this idea in their mind of, oh, you own businesses, you have all these things. It's like, yes, we have those things, but we also have what you don't see over here is this mountain of stress and, anxiety, because of it's not just you that it impacts. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
yes, I've got, employees sitting over there. Everything that I do impacts her. I've got, these contractors over here. Everything that I do impacts them. If I take cash out of here to try to do this, am I going to be able to still provide for them, A, B, C, D, E, F, G? It's like, okay, those are the kinds of decisions you're going through, as opposed to, I'm an employee, I'm a high producing, high functioning executive, but at the end of the day, you're still focused on this one little box.
Exactly. Exactly. And you start to realize that every decision that you make has such far-reaching implications.
Yep,
And, it's not just your employees that you're impacting their families. You have to make hard decisions where, let's be real, like a lot of our employees become really good friends.
absolutely.
And there's times where you outgrow them. There's times where things happen in the business where, you might have to let one, two, or 10 people go. Um, that you actually really like, but they no longer have a place in the business. And those aren't easy decisions to make. They're not at
No,
all.
it's, as my wife would say, it's very cold. you
Yep.
know, I mean, but that's how we operate. It's like, okay, business is business, personal is personal, and we're able to separate that. Um, which not a lot of people are, surprisingly.
Well, and it's
It's
also knowing that you have to make decisions. In fact, so this is back when I was in my 20s, I took a Dale Carnegie course. And
I think I've
I
got
was
the little
sitting in
golden
there.
book somewhere over
Yeah.
here.
Well, I was sitting in there and I got, really bothered because they were talking about how to handle stress and how to handle situations and stuff. And they were saying, look, when you're really stressed, you got to keep busy to distract yourself from the problem. And I'm like, this is terrible advice. And I got so frustrated with it that I actually said, look, I want a refund. This is terrible advice. I don't even think you should be teaching this to people. And this was in Denver, so it was the Rocky Mountain Dale Carnegie, and they said, "Look, we've never done this before, but we will give you a refund." And because I was adamant, I was indignant, and but what they said to me was, look, you're an entrepreneur. You're in a position that you can handle situations very differently than a lot of the people that come through this course can. A lot of people have no control over their situation. They just have to figure out how to handle it and how to deal with it. And I was like, well, all you're doing is teaching them more passivity, and they're not going to get out of the situation. Um, but that the reality is, like, there's a lot of those people in the world, and
Yeah,
there's a place for them, and there's a reason why they're here. But those of us that are going out, and if we want to make a change, I mean, you're talking about stress. What over time you come to realize is success, as an example, is directly correlated to your ability to handle higher levels of stress. It's not like, oh man, I'm going to go from 100,000 to a million and it's going to get easier. No, you're going to get a completely different kind, but higher levels of stress. And then when you hit 10 million, it's even more stress. And yes, you've got some money, you can do other things and so forth. But I can tell you from experience, $100,000 decision is less stressful than a $5 or $10 million decision.
very much.
um, because oftentimes, in almost all those cases, they're going to represent the same percentage of your net worth.
Correct.
And,
Yeah,
you don't
it's
want to
what.
go back to that $100,000 situation once you're up at the 10 million.
But
So
if you make the wrong decision, you very well might.
exactly. And while we're on the topic of decisions too, I mean, I think that that's the other thing that it differentiates people who are successful in the entrepreneur space versus really anywhere else. To be successful, it comes down to your ability and willingness to make decisions. Anybody who delays a decision, you're just basically guaranteeing your failure.
Yep. It's funny. I have weekly, well, every couple of days, I have meetings with some of my uh, virtual contractors in the accounting world. And they're like, how do I handle this? And I always say, I give them two things. I said, I'll give you the knee jerk reaction right now, the knee jerk decision. And then if I change my mind, I will email you back. It's like, and, 9.5 times out of 10, the immediate, here's the data set or the question you're dealing with, boom, intake, and then output, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you've done these things so many times. You're like, okay, boom, 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 go back in the memory banks, boom, vomit out whatever it is supposed to be. It's like, I think I can count on one hand, the amount of times that I've had to go back and re retell what I want them to do.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, all right, the ability to make a decision is, boom, in,
Yeah.
compute, out, and it's usually the best decision. Like you always tell people to go with your gut. So the go with your gut, works in some scenarios. But there's the finance component, there's the legal component, the tax component, all these things. You're like, okay, knee-jerk reaction is usually only going to cover one of those boxes. So you're like, okay, if I have to cover multiple scenarios or multiple uh, verticals, you're going to have to take a little bit more time. And that's where
Yeah.
the go with your gut tends to get in the way, because it's like, oh, I want to buy this building. Hey, it's only this amount of money. Okay, yes, but boom,
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom. It's like,
Well,
okay,
and I think you're hitting on like the difference between there's a lot of people who stay small because what they're doing is they over time you develop your intuition
yep,
and you still have to be able to utilize your intuition. But and this is one of the reasons why our company exists in the way it does too, is that as you start to grow, you start to have to get into spaces that you yourself don't have any experience with. So you
yep,
need to bring in, you know, the sales, the marketing, the operations, HR, legal, finance, and bring all of those representations to the table. And then what you're able to do is, yes, use some of your intuition to then synthesize the decision based off of
yep,
having all of those perspectives.
yep.
And I think that a lot of us, there let's also be real here. One of the reasons that a lot of people get into running a business is just because they're really bad at working with other people and they're really bad at taking advice or taking instruction. So some people that are listening to this will never do what I'm talking about. But the reality is you actually have to there's maybe 2% of the time that you have to be the one to, if you're really going to scale a business where you say, I have the answer, this is exactly it. The rest of the time, you got to be okay not knowing anything. And that's how you build the team. That's how you start bringing the people around you that do know these things. And you can build something that truly scales way beyond your own
You got to
personal
be
ability.
comfortable. You got to be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable and be comfortable
Yeah.
with listening to other people.
Yeah. Well, you got to get real
Because
comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like that's the,
absolutely,
yeah. Well, let me do this. I'll move into what happened with COVID because I think it speaks directly
yeah,
to this. Um, so the year, leading up to COVID, 2019, I got divorced. I went through, I mean, it left me basically in a horrible financial state. I basically left that relationship with my truck, my surfboards, my camping gear, and one of my two dogs. So I was not in a good state, and so I wallowed in that for a little bit, and then jumped back into consulting. And I had when COVID hit, I had a number of great clients, but I had just been getting back on my feet. I was single again. I wasn't saving any money. I was living in LA, and I also had all of these clients in one very particular industry. They were um, they were all in the experiential marketing space. So they were
okay,
agencies, software platforms, some other things. So by April 1st of 2020,
you had
I
zero
had,
clients.
yeah, I had advised every single one of them. Basically, we called it winterizing. We had no
Yep.
idea how long this was going to go. But like I had one client who lost over $4 million just because Expo West, a big natural foods expo
Yeah.
in Anaheim, was shut down that year. So there was a huge impact. So initially, I went back, found some other consulting clients. I'm fortunate I have a pretty big network, and I was helping. I helped one of my buddies, actually originally from grad school, reposition and sell a business that he owned. But I started an agency with a former client and another friend. Interestingly, neither one of them had business partners before, and so
Aha.
we scaled that agency to about $1 million in about 10 months. But it was working with that group. I love them as individuals, but as business partners, it was not going to work. And so I, for the first time at this point in about 13, 14 years, I went out and told people, hey, I sent 12 emails and said, I'm open to taking a job. And from that, I was offered a role with a company. And at this point, I had already, COVID hit. I moved my family originally to Ensenada, Mexico from LA. If you were in LA when COVID hit, you'd understand why we got out. And right when this occurred, we were visiting La Paz, Mexico, which is in southern Baja. And that's when I had the first call to interview and sort of talk about this role. That's when I sent out these messages. And I was offered the job. I was coming in as number 3 in this company. And, I built out a plan, all of this. It seemed like it was going to be a great gig. It was somebody that I didn't know very well, but I'd known for some time. And it was him and his brother running the company. And so at that point, my family and I, started making the preparations to move permanently down to Mexico, to southern Mexico. And we went back up to the States. I visited with the team that I was working with now. And very quickly, I realized this was not going to be a good gig for me. I was never in my life have I been told. So I was tasked with helping to grow the business, and I was not given a budget, but I was given targets. And so they said, basically, if you just make a good enough pitch to us, we can invest a lot of money. Okay, well, gave them a number of pitches, nothing happened. They kept on objecting. I said, okay, what is your budget? We really don't have a budget. Doesn't matter. Okay, what is your timeline? Well, we don't like to set timelines on targets because if our team misses that target, it might adversely impact their morale. So I felt like I was put in this losing situation, and they actually let me go after 5 weeks, which was a blessing in disguise. However, this was right as me and my family were crossing, the woman who's now my wife, we were crossing the border to drive back into Mexico literally the day before, to then move down to La Paz. And again, I had taken way less than I should have leaving that agency because I wanted to get out. And I thought, hey, I've got this gig. I'm going to be there I've got 3 months. I know I can make a big impact. I ended up crossing the border with my family with about $6,300 in the bank. And we had to drive 2 days, including Airbnbs south, to get to where we were going in Mexico. And about $4,000 of that was our deposit and first month's rent on the house that we had rented. So we get down there. We couldn't move in for the first 3 weeks. My family and I were eating bean and cheese burritos. We weren't eating, the fresh fish and everything we went down there to eat. And I, of course, immediately, as soon as we got there, I started sending out emails. And within 5 days, I got my first client. And I went back to consulting agencies and B2B service companies because on my drive down there, I was just thinking through every business I've ever worked with, the companies I've built before, and agencies and B2B service companies. They are some of the least understood but simplest to grow. And once you understand how to grow them, there's a lot that can be done. And so I started reaching out to all of those contacts. Like I said, I got my first client. And this was in August, by about March, I was doing $25,000 to $30,000 a month. And so I continued to grow this business, and I got to a point in, this was in 2023 now, at the beginning of 2023, that I was doing basically 44 hours a week of client calls. And so that wasn't any of the other work to do with the business. And so I started looking again, okay, how do I scale this? So we started I started bringing on some other founders. I was looking specifically for people who had experience scaling to at least 8 figures. So I brought on one guy named Josh Bonham, and we brought on a few other sort of support roles for us, still focused on consulting. But what we started to find very quickly was that there was a big gap. We could tell somebody what they need to do. You need to go hire this marketing, you go hire a marketing firm. You need to hire a sales guy. You need to, whatever it might be. But then the gap between decision and execution was 3, 4, 5 months
Yeah.
because of all of the legwork. So I said, okay, how do we fix that? So initially, we started to develop relationships with a lot of subject matter experts and other agencies, but we also found that to be hit or miss. And so as we continued to grow, we started to build out a lot of these services in house because we have consistent types of clients that we work with. So since we started now, we have a recruiting and staffing arm that is doing dozens of placements a month right now. In about 70% of them are in Latin America, and the rest primarily in North America.
Okay.
We have a marketing arm that is focused on lead gen and conversion. And that's been blowing up. In fact, while I'm talking to you, I'm getting messages about new deals closed there. And we still do our consulting. So we do a lot of operations consulting, operations improvement, building out project management systems, optimizing internal ops, financial management. So what we're able to do is, really the biggest thing we have to deal with now is mindset, because somebody comes in and they think, hey, I want to really grow. I want to grow 40% this year. And we're like, 40% is a failure for us. Once you get out of your own way and you realize that these service businesses can grow 4x year over year, now
Yes.
we can actually start talking. And that's actually become the biggest challenge, is just getting the founders out of their own mindset of, 20 to 30 or 40% is a great year of growth, where we view it completely differently. So,
Yeah. I like to call those paper walls. You know,
yeah, yeah,
creating a problem where there isn't one, and you got
exactly.
to get out of your own way.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think relating that back also to stress, and sort of the desire to sort of operate in discomfort. I'll give a couple of things. One is, what I didn't mention in all of this is, my wife and I have permanent guardianship over her younger sister, who's 25 years younger than she is. And unfortunately, their birth mothers had some pretty serious issues with substances and other things. As we crossed the border, um, the birth mother attempted to kidnap our daughter, and then after breaking out of a recovery
An
program.
institution. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then the great American legal system, even though she had no job and couldn't afford an attorney, gave her one to then sue us for custody. So here I am without money, without a source of income, also then having to hire an attorney to basically keep my family together at this point. And then, and pay for my, you know, pay for rent, pay for everything else. I had no choice but to figure this out. And what I found is, having your back against the wall is usually the time where you make the most growth. And I really push people. We talk to clients all the time, and they're like, well, I don't think now's the right time. Like, I've got this and this, and my back's totally against the wall. And this is the best time. This is the
Yeah.
exact time that you want to get started, because this is the time where you're actually going to make major changes and make massive growth in your business. The other thing is, you talked about sort of that intuition and making decisions. As a growing up, what I didn't include is, I spent a lot of time outdoors, a lot of time in the water. I was a wilderness EMT, did search and rescue. So I've always known, you drop me anywhere in the world, I'm going to survive. But
Yep.
then coming down to Mexico and having to start a new business and, start from scratch, and had no choice but to succeed. That's a different type of confidence, right? You put me anywhere in the world, I'm going to build a business. I'm going to build something that thrives. And having that level of confidence of having lived it, it allows you to take those bigger risks, because, hey, if this fails, start again. I'll do it again.
Yeah. And you've proved that you can do it, not only domestically, but internationally as well.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. In
I
the
mean,
city, I knew
so
no one.
Right. You
Yeah.
know, and I mean, so are most of your clients are kind of, I'm going to say geographically west, or I mean, let's put it this way. You're working with Latin America, North America. Are you working globally or is it really Latin America, North America?
We're working globally. We've got clients, we've worked with clients from Canada to Argentina, from Israel to Australia, and
Okay.
everywhere in
So
between. In fact,
circumnavigate. Yeah.
yeah, just in the last 24 hours, I've been on the phone with Australia, Germany, UK, Canada, US. So yeah, it's I mean, you see what's going on in the US. I'm not no longer based there. Our target is really within the next 9 to 12 months to have about 40% or less of our revenue coming from the United States just by continuing to expand internationally.
That's spectacular. So what do you see from, working with people all around the world? I mean, I think if you went back and listened to the 50 some episodes of this podcast, excuse me, that are out, you'd find a lot of similarities of what people are dealing with because it's all US based
Yeah.
entrepreneurs that I'm talking with. What do you see differences worldwide versus US based and how companies operate and what they focus on?
Um, I think that there's a lot of differences if we start, it's interesting. I first encountered this visiting Toronto years ago. This was maybe, I don't know, 14 years ago. And I was talking with a lot of business owners, and they would talk about how different business was in the US versus Canada. And here I am, like, how can it be that different? Like there's a lot of similarities here. But they talked about the speed. So, one thing I would say is depending on the culture, there's different levels of speed and willingness to take risks. There's also, even just how leads are generated and sort of how people develop their business. Like for instance, working with Israeli clients, seeing how just doing cold outreach on LinkedIn and stuff is nowhere near as impactful as getting into private WhatsApp groups or things like that, where it's much more of a closed community, and that it's really important to generate, to sort of market yourself and position yourself differently. It's more of who do you know, where in the States, people are more likely to just hop on cold email and fire out, thousands of cold emails, and you may actually get a good response. Um, I think that there's one thing that I think that would highlight one of the biggest differences in the States is even in Latin America, a lot of times it comes down to who do you know? And
Sure.
in the States, people are more willing to just sort of give a chance. And it's less of it, it's more about positioning. Who have you worked with in the past? Who are your testimonials? And sure, let me give you a shot. You see that that's not really the case in a lot of other places. I could get into the nuances of like the different types of negotiating and things like that we encounter. I even, I've got clients where like I'm taking a client through a liquidation and coming out of a liquidation in Australia and learning the ins and outs of the legal system there and sort of how business operates there. Where I think at the end of the day, though, one of the reasons that people are coming to us in particular is because we are bringing sort of that more North American US minded approach and helping them apply that in other locations. It's also
So
it's super
it sounds like, outside the US is, I'm going to call it slower pace, or I don't know if slow, I guess less willingness to take risk quickly.
I think it's you could characterize it as that, yeah, less willingness to take risk. Also, you have to consider things just like capital availability.
Sure.
Like here in Latin America, most people are, tremendously underbanked. There is no, like, there's almost no equity market because if you can, I've got one guy that I've done a fair amount of work with here that, he's funded his multi-million dollar startup with real estate backed loans that he's paying 80% interest rate on. Yeah.
How?
And that was one of the best options that he had to fund it. It was better than just about any other option that was out there. So, I mean, I think a lot of people take for granted the availability. I mean, even something as simple as, if you're taking payments through Stripe, a lot of us take for granted that, oh, look, Stripe is offering me 250 grand in financing, and yeah, it's not great rates, but it's a heck of a lot better than the rates that you'd be getting if you were borrowing here in Mexico, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, 80% is just, I mean, mind-boggling compared to, 6 to 15 here.
Yeah, and people complain about the interest rates in the States when in reality, I think the availability of capital and the willingness for people to just jump in and take a risk and try something in the States is very different. Um, I think that the other thing that I enjoy about working with particularly less developed countries is as soon as you start digging in, you start to see, like, in the States, any gap in the market has been filled by something. You know,
Sure.
there's a quarter millimeter gap and somebody's building something to fit it right in there. You walk through Mexico, and Mexico is very well developed, right? But you get into other countries, Colombia or Guatemala, places like that, and there's mile wide gaps that you start to identify, and there's huge opportunities. And so bringing that mindset from the States of, like, you see a gap, how do you fill it, and then you start to see these massive gaps, it creates huge opportunity. And um, I'll take that a step further too, because I talk to people all the time who say, "Oh man, I just one day I hope I can move to Mexico too. I just got to do X, Y, or Z." No, like, the worst thing that you're doing to make your goals achievable is not leaving and moving now, because as soon as you start to move and you realize how accessible everything is, how literally you can start a business much easier here in Mexico than you can in the U.S. Way easier, and you can have something up and running, you can be making money, and you can be bringing that same mindset that you have in the States here. Not to mention your cost and quality of your cost of living is a fraction of what it is in the States, and the quality of life is 10x what you're getting in the States. So it's something that I think that as soon as you allow yourself to break free of that, then you start to see the opportunities. And just due to
Getting out of your
political
own way
climate.
again.
Oh yeah. And then you also start to realize that literally everything you read in the media is completely fabricated. You are way
Absolutely.
safer here in Mexico as an American citizen than you are as an American citizen in Mexico. We're way safer here. And people don't want to believe that because they're being told something else in the media. And that's great because it leaves more opportunity for people like me.
So when you come into, so, I assume, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, but you're kind of helping your current clientele kind of identify these mild wide gaps and position themselves in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are you doing that? So are these mile wide gaps within their own business, or are they within business verticals themselves?
Oftentimes it's within their own business, or like, let's say we're working with a Latin American based agency, and we see opportunities like, here's two that are very well filled in the US, but are, you might be lucky to find one or two in many markets in Latin America. um, People who exist just to optimize online presences um, of restaurants, or agencies that build and optimize real estate listings
Okay.
for real estate brokers. I mean, in the States, you walk down the street and you're tripping over real estate photographers and people wanting to build their websites and so forth. In a lot of these other markets, they just don't exist. And so you're out there struggling, hey, I want to buy a piece of real estate. And you go and, it gives some generic description of location, a couple of crappy photos, and you have no idea if it's worth your time. And so there's examples like that. But then there's also the flip side that, being here in Latin America, most people, when they think hiring overseas or even near shore, they think Upwork. The reality is, if you're using Upwork and you're hiring someone for any more than about 10 hours a week, I guarantee you that a direct hire, when you understand how to get to those direct hires, is going to be far more economical full time than that 10-hour a week hire that you're doing.
Sure.
And so it blows my mind when we talk to, agencies that, or really any business in the States that is fully remote or largely remote, but they have their entire team based in the US. So, I'll talk to people that have 40, 50, even 80-person completely remote teams, 100% based in the US. And we start looking at who they've got. And we're like, wow, within 6 months, we can likely improve the quality of the team you have and save you $1.5 million a year. And it never even occurs to them that that's possible. And once you start to show them that, and then you layer in um, process optimizations and so forth, there's by learning that you can leverage these different pieces, you're able to be very, very competitive. And the reality is, most of these companies, their competitors are already figuring this out. So if they're not moving on this, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. So how do you, I guess, how do you help them incentivize these, let's say the new team members, the accessible people, who you're going to hire? How do you help incentivize them to make sure, one, that they're happy, and two, that they're going to stay with that company as opposed to the next great thing that comes along?
Um, First, I think that you're going to see that people job hop less outside the US.
Okay.
Um, and to give you an idea, here in Mexico, um, for someone who's got a college degree, $2,000 a month is a very good salary. And so, we're able to hire someone who's director level that has, 8 to 15 years experience, typically for well under $4,000 a month, which is still far more than they're making in the local market. And so, really it comes down to, yes, you want to incentivize them correctly. And, we work with clients on how do you build their job descriptions, how do you onboard them, how do you make sure that they're being really well supported there. But then it's also just the culture. Like it doesn't matter how much you're paying somebody if you've got a shitty culture, people
Sure.
aren't going to stick around.
Yeah.
And even things as simple as we introduce things like, there's online free versions of basically like Mario Kart and stuff like that. You fire up Zoom and have the team play against each other for an hour. That's phenomenal. A little shit talking, and everybody is feeling closer and having fun. There's little things like that that you can do. It's obviously, if you're running a remote team, there's other steps that you have to take to make sure that everybody feels connected, and we have to work with people on that, because you can't just hire someone and forget about them.
Right.
But it does come down to culture. It comes down to how you incentivize people, and the incentivizing. This becomes a deeper conversation, because a lot of people want to incentivize people on performance, but they don't have any systems in place to measure performance. So it's not just a hiring and job structure; it's your operations, your systems, and everything else that's in place.
So I guess completely going back to kind of some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning, kind of this stress management and mindset. How, what would you tell people, or what would you tell your clients are the biggest factors in dealing with that mindset and stress management pieces? How to deal with it?
So my team realized something anecdotally, but then we went back and kind of reviewed everything, because it was this sort of major realization that we had. And we find a direct correlation between the achievement of business goals with our clients and them having some sort of physical health or physical fitness routine in place.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I think that correlates is, number one, obviously stress management, right? Like I lift heavy weights. Trust me, I'm way better to be around after I've had a gym session than before, right? It's one of the reasons I go in the morning. Now, the other is it teaches you things like delayed gratification, consistency, and, doing the things that you really don't want to do. And so you're going to face stress, you're going to face mindset challenges, but you have to, number one, stick to the plan.
Yep.
And so I think probably the one that most people can relate to is sales. Very few people love sales. In fact, most people are looking at how do I get out of sales? And so the moment that there's like an operations issue, okay, screw sales, I'm going to go deal with operations, or I'm going to deal with this client issue or something like that. If you treat sales like getting dressed and brushing your teeth in the morning, it's a non-negotiable, then you're going to succeed. But you have to treat those things, no matter what stress comes up, as a non-negotiable. And so I think that that has to do with the stress, right? Like, you can't use something that comes up as an excuse to not go back to the fundamentals and focus on the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think I learned a number of years ago, because I despise sales, right? I'm in what I consider a non-sales role, right?
Yeah.
But once I realized that I'm always selling something, whether it's in my mind, whether it's a service, whether it is, a platform, whatever. As soon as you realize that you are always selling something, even if you are in a service business, it
Yeah.
makes things a lot easier, and it makes things seem a lot less icky when it comes to the
Yeah.
sales side, right? It's like,
Yeah. And I'll add two additional things. So, Um, first off, when it comes to mindset, I think that that's one of the reasons why perspective is so important. You have to bring in people who have alternative perspectives until you get to the point where you have a team that surrounds you, that are top performers, that are also pushing you on a day-to-day basis. Then you need to bring in someone from the outside. It's one of the reasons why one of our most commonly met with subject matter experts is a mindset expert on our team, because the number of people that come to us and say, man, we've been at, we've got a client that came to us and been running his business for about 14 years. Best year he had was like 2.3 million. And we said, okay, we're going to double you now this year. Oh man, I don't think that's possible. And started resisting certain things that would be the thing that would lead him to growth. Now, we've been working with him for about a year and a half. And by the end of this year, he's going to be at over 8, and breaking through that. And this is after running the business for 14 years, right? And being right in that same sort of revenue level, breaking through those things, because oftentimes, like, we think about mindset often as an issue of like breaking through a barrier. It's how do I do something that's harder? But what ends up happening, and this is the second thing I'll get into in a moment, building a business is a lot like pushing a boulder uphill until you get to a certain point, and then you have to try to outrun the freaking boulder, right?
yeah,
Because then you're in the way of the business. And learning to let go is something that a lot of people have trouble with. Another anecdote: I had a client that we grew him from 10 to 18 million, and he had some bookkeepers and a controller on his staff. And we meet with all of our clients on Friday for 15 minutes to go through all of their metrics. Everything was great. We celebrated on that call that he crossed the $18 million run rate. My next call with him was on Tuesday. I asked him, how are things going? Going great. By the way, I fired these people. I was like, wait, that's your whole bookkeeping and accounting team. What happened? I'm thinking caught him stealing money, something like that. And he's like, no, it's just we're doing so much money now. I can't trust anybody else with the numbers. So those are those
speaking of
examples
running
of
out,
where,
speaking out of trying to outrun the boulder.
yeah. And those are the types of things that, like, mindset crept in. He probably spent all weekend just,
Stewing.
freaking out. Yeah, stewing over
Yeah.
this. And then what did he do? He did the one thing that was probably going to slow him down the most, because if anybody knows, sitting and trying to do your bookkeeping, it's a lot of time and a lot of cognitive load too. And
Yes.
so I think that, mindset is not just about pushing through, but it's also a lot about like, how do you stop white knuckling everything and start to let go and then stay off the wheel at that point. And that leads me into like, this could be helpful for a lot of people listening. We sort of break down the phases of growth. And so when you get started, your first 200 to 500,000 is really just because you're good at something, right? You don't have to be good at selling. You have to be good at delivering the service. And, you can get it through referrals, just the random people you connect with on LinkedIn. You're just good at that thing. Then to get up to about 2.5 to 4 million, you got to be damn good at sales. And that needs to be your number one focus is
Yep.
sell, 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 sell. Then from about 4 to 10, that's building out all of those functions so that the business can actually function and execute on those functions without you having to be the one to do it. And then once we get beyond there, that's where we start to get into some more complexity within the organization. But the reality is, like, strategy and all that other work, it's really just busy work until you get to the point where you're up at that point where you're actually building the org, which is much bigger than most people want to think. They're trying to do that at 400,000 when they need to be doing it at 4 million.
Yeah. Yep. And I would say I see that time and time again. Like everybody in that 2 to 5 million space is like laser focused on trying to develop systems, processes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so that, if one person leaves, another person can step in without them having to reach. I mean, obviously you have to train, but like it's all documented there, right? You're like, yes, that's true, but it's like stepping over a dollar to pick up a penny. It's like
100%.
every time you're focusing on the wrong things. Like I've got a client right now who, his COO wants to, everything on these line items, and he's worrying about, $20 or $50 differences. I'm like,
Yeah.
stop with this. You're focusing on the wrong thing. I was like, here's what drives it. Here's what makes all these things work. That's what you need to focus on. All these things will follow.
Yeah. And, you know, the most common situation that people find themselves in that revenue range is that they have a revenue issue. They have a lead gen, they have a conversion, they have a sales issue, where the people that we see that succeed the most, they come to us and they're doing 2 million, 4 million, sometimes 12 million, and they have a very bloated team. They can keep selling, but they're like, hey, the reason I can't keep selling is because my operations are a mess. You know what? We fix those operations. They don't have to deal with that anymore. I mean, we'll take teams of 60 and turn them into 35 because they were just throwing people at problems. And guess what? They start accelerating like no other. But if you're focused on operations and think you're going to solve the sales problem later, you're sorely mistaken.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. All right. Well, we've been on here for about an hour and 10 minutes. I think we should probably start to wrap things up here. Um,
Yep.
so, usually towards the end of every episode, we give, the guests, a few minutes to leave messages to our listeners, whether it's offering advice, discussing something you care about, expand on personal experiences, or, whatever comes to mind, kind of promoting strategy ladders and what Brian Smith has to offer.
Yeah. I'll give two. One is more of a personal thing, and the best thing anybody can do for themselves is to change location. So if you're looking to level up, look at moving. Your kids are going to adapt. You're going to find new people. You're going to be able to choose your circle and truly level up and become the person that you want to be. Um, and if you're looking at moving outside the states, quit lying to yourself and saying that you need to do something before you get there. Like, the reality is, the sooner you do it, the better off you're going to be. And that's not a comment on the states. It's just more of a comment of,
Get out of your own
especially
way.
if you're moving, yeah, if you're moving someplace that has a lower cost of living, you're going to save more money. It's easy. Um, the, uh, the other is, that, and this is something that we work with on our team, and work with our clients on. Um, Consistency is going to trump skill every time. And so if you're struggling, just get consistent. In fact, the first doubling of just about every one of our clients just comes down to keeping them consistent. The 4 or 5x numbers, that yes, there's additional work that goes into that, but the first doubling of every client that comes to us is just about getting them consistent. So focus on that consistency. And if you're in a position where you're looking at how to exit your business, you feel stuck, or you're growing so fast that you're not really sure what direction you want to take things, please schedule a time with us. We do a lot more than just consulting. We actually can come in and execute on a lot of the work that you need. So we can completely transform a business in 90 to 180 days. And most of our clients stay with us for 18 months or longer just because of the impact that we're able to create for them. If you want to learn more about us, strategyladders.com, or look for our podcast by searching for Strategy Ladders, and find me on LinkedIn, S. Brian Smith.
You took the next spot of my of where I was going with it. I was like, hey, how do our listeners find out more about Strategy Ladders? Well, you did it already. StrategyLadders.com, Strategy Ladders Podcast, or find Brian Smith on LinkedIn. Perfect. I love it.
Sorry for jumping there. I've been on a few podcasts
you're good.
before.
Yeah.
So.
You knew exactly where I was going with it. It was perfect. All right. Well, as you know, my name is Derek Dall'Olmo. I'm the owner of both Tremonti Financial Consultants and Tremonti Tax Solutions, together referred to as Tremonti. Tremonti bridges the gap between financial advisors and accountants by serving as CFO to our clients. We specifically love to work with business owners to develop a proactive tax strategy that maximizes after-tax profits. It's our job to help you earn more, be more efficient, grow faster, and pay as little in taxes as legally possible. If this idea piques your interest, please go to TremontiTax.com and click on the Schedule Now button to book a 15-minute chat with me. Whether we end up working together or not, I'd love to hear from you. With all that said, Brian, it was really good talking to you today. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely, man. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Derek. And look forward to talking again soon.
Appreciate it. For those listening, if you enjoyed today's episode and had a few helpful takeaways, we'd love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and share this episode with other business-minded friends. This has been another episode of the Traversing Entrepreneurship podcast. We had fun today and hope you did too. Thanks again, Brian, for being here, and thank you for tuning in and listening. Peace.
This podcast is presented by Tremonti Financial Consultants, LLC. The firm is registered as an investment advisor and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability. The information presented is believed to be current. It should not be viewed as personalized investment advice. All expressions of opinion reflect the judgment of the presenter on the date of the podcast and are subject to change. You should consult with a professional advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed. Content should not be viewed as an offer to buy or sell any of the securities mentioned or as legal or tax advice. Always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation. Different types of investments involve higher and lower levels of risk. There is no guarantee that a specific investment or strategy will be suitable or profitable for an investor's portfolio. There are no assurances that a portfolio will match or exceed any particular benchmark. All investment strategies can result in profit or loss.